On the morning of February 17, 1944, at precisely 8:37 a.m., the humid air above the Pacific Ocean shook with the rising thunder of American carrier aircraft accelerating toward destiny. The flight deck of the USS Enterprise, the legendary Big E, vibrated under the pounding rhythm of launching F-6F Hellcats, their wings slicing through the dim pre-dawn haze as they leapt from steel into sky. Pilots tightened their harnesses, hearts steady but alert, knowing they were about to spearhead the most devastating carrier assault the world had yet witnessed. As the first wave climbed into the half-light toward Truk Lagoon, Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, stood rigid but calm on the bridge of his flagship. His eyes were fixed not on the individual aircraft but on the horizon, toward the greatest fortress the Japanese Empire had ever built outside the home islands. Operation Hailstone was beginning, and its outcome would redefine the very nature of warfare across the Pacific. Truk, often spelled truck or Truk in wartime documents, and known today as Chuuk, was no ordinary island outpost. It was the beating heart of Japanese strategy in the Central Pacific, the forward bastion of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the anchorage of the famed Combined Fleet. American intelligence called it the Gibraltar of the Pacific, a place so fortified, so saturated with guns, aircraft, tunnels, and coastal batteries, that an invasion was almost unthinkable. Surrounded by a barrier reef 40 miles across, Truk Lagoon sheltered dozens of warships and hundreds of support vessels at any given moment. Within the volcanic islands around the lagoon sat 5 major airfields: Eton, Moan, Purim, Dublon, Pfeffin, each crowded with aircraft concealed in hardened revetments. Beneath the jungle canopy, Japanese engineers had carved bunkers and tunnels capable of sheltering entire regiments. Warehouses brimmed with aviation fuel, ammunition, spare engines, torpedoes, and food. The garrison, numbering between 10,000 and 12,000, had trained for years to repel the massive amphibious assault they assumed would eventually come. Every hillside was a fortress. Every approach was a killing field. Every yard had been prepared for battle. And yet, as powerful as Truk was, it was also a prisoner of its own design, because every fortress is built on an assumption. The Japanese assumed the Americans would attack the strong point head-on. They assumed the enemy would play their game. But by early 1944, American commanders had learned a brutal truth during 2 years of island warfare. Frontal assaults on fortified Japanese positions were catastrophically costly, often militarily unnecessary, and increasingly unacceptable to the American public. No battle proved this more than the inferno at Tarawa. In November 1943, the U.S. Marine Corps assaulted the tiny island of Bidio during Operation Galvanic. Tarawa was barely 290 acres, smaller than the National Mall in Washington, but it was defended by 4,500 well-equipped, deeply entrenched Japanese troops. Against them, the United States committed 18,000 Marines, with overwhelming naval and air support. The planners believed the island's defenses would be smashed by hours of bombardment. They believed the landings would be difficult but manageable. They believed their firepower advantage would compensate for the Japanese fortifications. All these beliefs dissolved the moment the first wave hit the reef. Low tide stranded many landing craft far from shore. Marines stepped out into chest-deep water, wading hundreds of yards toward beaches pre-sighted by Japanese machine gunners. The defenders rose from their bomb-proof bunkers and unleashed a storm of fire: rifles, heavy machine guns, mortars, cannons, each shot guided by months of preparation. Marines died in the surf, shot down before taking a dozen steps. Others were dragged under by their own gear. Still others watched their friends collapse beside them as they fought for every breath. Those who reached the beach found themselves pinned down by interlocking guns firing from concrete hexagonal bunkers. Progress was measured in feet. The Marines destroyed pillboxes one by one with flamethrowers and satchel charges, each bunker like a miniature fortress demanding a toll in blood. For 76 hours the battle raged without pause. When it ended, more than 1,000 Marines lay dead and another 2,200 were wounded. Almost the entire Japanese garrison had been annihilated. The casualty ratio horrified the American public. Newspapers demanded answers. Families demanded accountability. Military planners stared at maps of future operations and saw only growing numbers of graves. And Tarawa, terrible as it was, paled in comparison to the monstrous defenses at Rabaul, the linchpin of the Japanese position in the South Pacific. At its peak, Rabaul housed over 110,000 Japanese troops, including infantry, naval personnel, aviators, engineers, and support units. 5 major airfields ringed Simpson Harbor. Hundreds of coastal guns lined the approaches. The Japanese had carved a labyrinth of tunnels into the basalt hillsides, storage rooms, headquarters, living quarters, command posts, many resilient enough to withstand anything short of a direct hit from a battleship's main battery. The base was so vast, so complex, that some tunnels extended for miles. To attack Rabaul directly would require months of bombardment, multiple divisions of infantry, and a bloodletting on a scale far worse than Tarawa. The thought was unbearable. General Douglas MacArthur, sitting in his headquarters in Brisbane in early 1943, studied the map of the Pacific and recognized the trap. Japan had concentrated its strength in a few fortress strongholds, Rabaul, Truk, Lagoon, Wake, and others. Assaulting each one sequentially would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, delay the march toward Japan by years, and potentially break public support for the war. MacArthur, a student of military history, understood something fundamental. When the enemy concentrates his strength in one direction, you win by attacking somewhere else. Napoleon did it. Robert E. Lee did it. Countless commanders across history had bypassed strong points rather than wasting men against them. But never had this concept been applied across thousands of miles of ocean, using air power and naval power to isolate entire armies. MacArthur's idea would become known as leapfrogging or island bypassing. His vision was simple but revolutionary. Avoid the fortified strongholds, seize the weak points, build airfields, cut enemy supply lines with submarines and aircraft, and let the garrisons wither on the vine. A Japanese soldier trapped on a bypassed island might be brave, determined, and equipped for war, but he was useless. He could not influence the fighting elsewhere. He consumed food, ammunition, and medical supplies. He required transports to reach other battlefields. If he starved in isolation, that was one less Japanese rifle firing at Americans later. Admiral William Bull Halsey immediately supported the concept. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Central Pacific, recognized its logic. Even Admiral Ernest King, initially skeptical, came to accept the practicality of avoiding costly showdowns with immovable fortresses. At the Quebec Conference in August 1943, Allied leaders agreed Rabaul would not be assaulted. It would be neutralized. The execution began swiftly. In November 1943, Marines and soldiers landed on Bougainville at Empress Augusta Bay. Instead of trying to clear the entire island, which housed large Japanese forces, they seized only the southern tip, built airfields at Cape Torokina, and began launching bombers at Rabaul. The effect was immediate and devastating. Japanese aircraft attempted to resist but were outnumbered, outflown, and outproduced. Losses mounted. Fuel shortages worsened. Replacement aircraft trickled in slowly, their pilots less experienced than the seasoned Americans facing them. By February 1944, Rabaul, once the most powerful base in the South Pacific, was nothing more than a defenseless target, bombed daily but impossible to reinforce or evacuate. The garrison of 110,000 men soon found itself growing vegetables in improvised gardens, fishing in the harbor, and waiting for an American invasion that never came. What happened at Rabaul proved the strategy worked. But Truk was the real test. The fortress at Truk was positioned far more strategically than Rabaul. It sat astride the shipping routes connecting Japan to the Central Pacific. It served as the home away from home for the combined fleet. Its airfields could strike deep into American lines of advance. If the Japanese were going to challenge American naval superiority anywhere, it would be near Truk. Destroying Truk, or neutering it, would be the key to breaking the Japanese defensive perimeter. Yet even after the success at Rabaul, many officers feared that bypassing Truk was too dangerous. What if the Japanese fleet attacked American supply lines from Truk? What if the garrison launched a counterattack against lightly defended American bases in the Marshalls or Carolines? What if leaving a hostile stronghold at their backs doomed the American advance? These were valid concerns that only overwhelming American air and naval superiority could answer. And by early 1944, the United States possessed exactly that. The Essex-class carriers were arriving monthly. Hundreds of Hellcats, Helldivers, and Avengers rolled off American production lines each week. Pilot training programs were producing aviators faster than the Navy could place them. Meanwhile, Japanese production slowed, fuel shortages worsened, and experienced pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced. The mathematics of attrition favored the Americans in every category. Thus, Spruance's Fifth Fleet and Admiral Mark Mitcher's Task Force 58 prepared to strike the blow that would determine whether Truk would remain a threat, or become another Rabaul.